Howdy, everyone. So how's everyone doing? Thumbs up, good, great. And I just got to blow my screen up here so I can do my share. And there we go. And I'm going to share this little guy right here. And we're going to go share. And we're going to go play. And off we go. So good afternoon. Great to see some of you again. Some of you maybe I've never met, and hopefully in the future I'll have the pleasure to meet you in person. So we're going to talk about the new world of forms, understanding, implementing, and communicating. My name is Chris Vogt. I'm a broker, aka a director of transactional excellence. So one of the things that I've always thought about when you think about brokers, brokerages, and this word we use, compliance, I always like to take a different tact, and that is if we can be our own director of our transactional excellence, I think we win, and more importantly, our customers win. So I actually have a couple of mission statements. I have a personal mission statement in life, and this is with respect to the business, and that's to revolutionize the way the real estate agent, that would be all of you, and or real estate brokers, and ultimately the customers think about the real estate transaction. This is my 33rd year in this industry. Still don't know everything. I'm still learning like all of you, and I'm not seeing everything, but I've learned a lot. And I've seen a lot. And one of the things that I've observed is that many and most really don't think a lot about the real estate transaction until there's something going really wrong. And by the way, we use this same talk track for our consumers. We tell them out of the gate that it is our goal to help them think about the real estate transaction. And we'll touch a little bit on that as it relates to this very fun topic that we're gonna rifle through. So at the end of the day, that's why I'm here today. So we're gonna spend 90 minutes plus or minus going through. I'm gonna give you a whirlwind jet tour. If you've been spending any time in the real estate world on any of the CAR stuff, you will be most likely a little further down the road as we touch on many of those same topics. And then what it'll allow you to do is refine those thoughts and ideas. So when we get to the questions and ultimately get to strategy, like how are we gonna do this in our businesses? Because at the end of the day, that's really what matters. That's where we'll go through Q&A and strategy. Okay. So my goal is to again, as I said from the beginning, is really to help you understand. So ultimately what today is not about, because it takes a lifetime, right? Because there's a lot of words in the contracts, disclosures, in our business in general, right? So I've always found, and the way I was taught as a youngster way back when, was that if I could understand the concept, right, somewhere in the form, there's going to be the answer. Okay. So by the way, I don't necessarily love forms and paperwork for the sake of loving forms and paperwork. But I do love them because it can actually make my job easier when I'm trying to understand and ultimately explain and implement with the customer. And then the other thing is to help minimize stress. Without question, every time there's a change in our lives, and certainly in our businesses, it does create stress. How we navigate and how we manage stress is different among every one of us. But my goal here today is to ultimately help minimize stress. Now, as we're going through this, for some of you, your stress might actually start going up, okay? And by the way, there's going to be some things maybe that you're going to hear that just don't make any cotton picking sense in terms of like, that doesn't make sense. Why are we doing it this way as an industry, right? So that is all understandable. And what I want you to know, so I have a real estate firm I've worked for some of the largest real estate companies on planet Earth. I run a small brokerage now of 8 agents. 2 of those agents, one's a broker, my son Kyle some of you have met, my wife, Kelly, who you've not met officially. And when I talk to my own business partner wife about this subject, she's like, well, that doesn't make any sense. I understand, but here's what we're dealt with. Okay. So I'm keenly aware of stress, so much so that, if you're sitting here today, there's a real possibility that you could be feeling a little bit like this. Anyone feel that way? Yeah, that's my 6.5-year-old granddaughter, Rosie Newton. So that's a photo from last week of her. So we're gonna have a little fun along the way too. Okay, the other thing that I think is really, really important is that in times of stress, we focus on what really matters. Now, when I say that, I mean what really matters in life, right? Because this is a stressful time in our industry for sure. In my 33 years, I went through the financial crisis of 07, 08, navigating and through with a very large real estate office. But what I found was through the thick and thin, and I believe that this is potentially the most stressful time in our history. We thought the pandemic was a challenge. Remember the PED forms, right? This is that in retrospect pales in comparison. Okay. So by the way, so this is what I focus on. Okay. And this is our family 4th of July. And those are my, for those of you that know me previous, family is a high priority. And those are our little, those kids all come out of our cloning factory here in Wilton, California. That's a joke, by the way. Okay. So there's a bold law number 4. I was going to test you today, but I thought I better not do that. Clarity equals power. Clarity equals power. So the more knowledge you can gain, the clearer you will become and the more powerful you will feel. Okay. So I'm going to go through some practice tips for you to help you, again, minimize stress and at the end of the day, help you gain more clarity, which will allow you to be more powerful in your business. So we will move quickly. Now we will slow down, obviously, key points, but we're going to move relatively rapidly so that we can cover the high points. I'm going to ask you as best you can to avoid distractions. Again, I'm a realist, been in the business. I'm in the business just like you. To the best you can avoid distractions, texts, phone calls, things like that, the better off you're going to be. Questions and strategy session at the end. Okay. If you need to go to the bathroom, you're okay to do that. I won't keep you from doing that. So your own breaks. And by the way, I think I know Jasmine was there, Linda was there. I don't know if Christine Willer, a couple of others, but I've been down to your market center a few times. Steve, you've been there, and every now and again you're going to see a typo. Okay, so I don't want you to focus on the presenter's typos. See where it says that there? So that's by the way, I had candle after cued in here. So you might see a typo. This is not an English class, okay? So don't focus on the typos. Okay, so right quick, how did we get here? I'm presenting this to you because this, again, I think will give us a little bit of understanding. Whether we agree with it or not, again, is somewhat irrelevant. Just so you know, I'm a personal big believer that we've never conspired and colluded as an industry regarding commission, okay? With that said, regardless of what I think or any of us think, apparently the federal government for years has been chasing that belief. Okay, so lo and behold, these suits started coming. DOJ continued to be involved, not very friendly to our business, and then there was the now infamous settlement that imposed practice changes. Okay. So the first thing, and this is where the more you understand the dates, and we're going to go through those dates today, the better you understand the dates, not just the forms. Again, that's not going to eliminate your stress, but it will minimize your stress. Okay. So practice changes as of, and I wrote ... because it depends on which MLS you're a member of. They all have their own dates. There's one up in Shasta County that I'm a member of. They're actually turning this thing over August 1st. The greater Sacramento area is the 13th. I believe CRMLS is the 12th, or maybe I have those two backwards. I'm not sure. But regardless, all these changes need to be implemented by the 17th of August. Okay. So by the way, offers of compensation, this is the first biggie, right? So as part of the settlement, By the way, there is no law that says this. This is not a law. Understand this. The part of this is, and this is where it gets a little bit confusing. We do want to comply with the settlement for one real singular reason. Hopefully, it will get them off our industry's back, right? But part of this is offers of compensation through the MLS have gone bye-bye. Okay, as of those magical dates. The terminology that we're using as we're communicating with our clients, and we've been communicating with our clients for months now on this topic. Okay, and I want to repeat that. We've been communicating with our clients on this for months on this topic. Okay, think about it. If you the last time you got on an airline, a good pilot, as you take off from LAX or wherever you take off from, they may say something like, hey, our expected flight time is this, whatever the case may be. And when we're over middle America, we may experience some turbulence, so on and so forth. They generally don't tell you that. They don't say anything, and suddenly you start feeling the plane rocking and rolling, right? So I want you to think about what your communication flow has been thus far with current active clients, so on and so forth, okay? The other part of it is written by our broker compensation agreements. And those also, and this is including but not limited to, I'm just hitting the highlights, the limits of the amount on the buyer broker, that amount is the amount you get to up to that amount. Okay, we'll talk about that, but you can't, in theory, you can't collect more than what's on that buyer broker agreement. So, Linda White is here. Is she in the room? Can she unmute herself, Stephanie?
I'm here, Chris. Let me put my camera
Linda.
back on.
Okay, Linda, is it legal for us to talk about commissions if I'm at another broker?
No.
No. Okay, so here's the good news. For today, and this is true, by the way, I'm actually a broker associate in the Calabasas KW office. I still run my brokerage up here, but because I'm a broker, I can be multiple. And I knew we were going to talk about commission, so I wanted to comply with that. Okay, so just so you know, I'm really one of you. Okay, so it limits the amount. So let's say, for example, it's 3% that the seller's ultimately willing to pay, but your buyer broker agreement only says 2% or $500 or 16 cents or 2.75. Okay, and we'll talk about this. But again, the settlement says that you're not allowed to collect beyond that. Okay. All right. So a couple things to remember and note. So the first thing I want to suggest is this: our industry, and I get it because, like I said, I've been doing this a long time. Our industry, we can be like many industries, very self-centered. And sometimes we forget, and I think we have often forgotten as an industry about the customer. So the first thing we want to do is we want to be empathetic to the consumer, because the consumer right now, as many of you know, has heard a bunch of things, depending on how closely they've been following this thing. Much of that has been misinformation, like the famous CNN headline, right? No more 6%, as if there were a standard. And there hasn't been for as far as I know, right? So there is an impact on the consumer. So when you're out there implementing and communicating, I believe it's really, really important that we have empathy for the consumer, okay? Now, without question, it affects us 100%. So hang on here. I want to move this out of my way. I got to move this because I can't. Why was it? Won't let me move it. Okay. So in order to meet the terms of this, all parties, associations, MLS, we need to enact practice changes. And I've highlighted essentially what they're saying, that align with the terms of the settlement, and that there's reasonable oversight conducted to ensure that we comply with the terms. The question that comes up on all these calls that I've been on, and maybe some of you have been, is, well, who's going to enforce all that? So I'm going to take you back to the PED situation, right? Who is enforcing that? Okay. Well, at the end of the day, really nobody, unless the listing broker said, well, you just can't come in because I'm trying to follow the rules. Okay. So by the way, we do want to comply with the rules. So I'm not saying don't follow the rules, but what I'm saying is the natural question for many in our business will say, well, if it's not a law, why do we have to do it? Because if we don't implement the practice changes and then conduct ultimately reasonable oversight, we run the risk of some greater penalty coming down the road. Okay. And oh, by the way, it's important. And I got a little smiley face next to this one. The court still needs to approve all this, which won't happen for some time, even when they do. Okay. There's going to be a gap because the 24th of June, which is next week, that's when the forms that are related to the settlement are going to drop. And we're going to go through some of those today. Okay. There's going to be a gap between that date and the date that the real world change occurs in your MLS. So if you go out and list a house on the 25th with a new form, for example, and it doesn't have co-op language in it, and the MLS still allows co-op, there's a gap. Okay. So, and again, and CAR told us from the beginning that offers of compensation are still allowed. They're just not allowed through the MLS. The other point I want to make is this. It is clear that CAR is out of the broker co-op compensation language business. What do I mean by that? If you by chance had looked at the forms that were going to drop back in June, because most of these forms were going to drop, I think all these forms were going to drop back in June, but the DOJ intervened and they held back some of the forms that are going to now be released on July 24th. You will notice that there's language that's been stripped from those specifically around broker compensation to a cooperating broker. It isn't there. And that's causing stress because it was there. Then they are going to release the new ones and we're going to go through this. It's not there. Okay. And by the way, buyer rep agreements are not the law of the land. So it's not a law. California at this point has not passed legislation that require them. Now, yet is the operative word here, because by all accounts, there's legislation that's being pushed through, and most predictably by the turn of the calendar from 24 to 25, it will, by all accounts, according to CAR, will be the law of the land. Okay. This is a fluid situation. And this is a quote from the town hall I was on this morning. Quote, "We are refining that language." Okay. So CAR understands that as the fluidity continues on this, they are going to have to continue to make adjustments. I've always been a big believer that we need to understand the document now so that when the change comes, we actually can more readily and quickly adopt what's in the new document. Okay. Thoughts and tips. Many and most consumers want and need our representation. Okay. Many and most want it and need it. Okay. The question is ultimately, what are they willing to pay for it? Now, by the way, that was true before this ever came to pass, right? Could a seller sell their home themselves? Yes. Right? When the market was like hotter than hot, and they had buyers lining up, they could sell their home. The question is, could they do it correctly? Could they comply with all the laws at the state, county, city, federal level? Same thing is true today, right? So many of most consumers want and need representation. You're going to have to just do that every now and again because you're going to get frustrated. Stephanie's a TL, and the TLs are the ones typically that get the brunt of the frustration. She and I talk a fair amount, and I often tell her, Steph, it's not about you. They're not mad at you. I know it feels like they are. It's kind of like when the meal comes out and we're short with the server. Well, they didn't cook the darn thing, right? So slow down and breathe. That's just a little tip. Read the documents. Read the documents. Read the documents. Read the documents. Use the correct terminology as best you can. When I was down last, I did a little test in your market center. I asked about the acronym that gets used quite a bit still, EMD. And the question I asked the group that day is, what does that stand for? What does that mean? And they're kind of looking at me like, well, you're dumb. And then I said this, where is EMD in the residential purchase contract? And there were two ladies in the room, and I won't call them out because you'll get mad at them because they knew the correct answer. There's no such thing as an EMD. It's called the initial deposit. That's subtle, but it's huge. Okay, so when we're going through these things, I'm a big believer, at least for me, that when I use correct terminology that aligns with the disclosures and the contracts, it actually empowers me because I then know that I know it. Okay, translate acronyms. You know, Keller Williams is a company of acronyms, right? DOFI, MCA, TL, blah 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 blah, right? So we get in the habit of an industry, RPA, RLA, MLS. Da, 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 okay? It's fine to use the acronyms. Do yourselves and your customers a favor and translate the acronyms, okay? Use a consistent client intake process. This isn't anything new. However, I'm a big believer that because of the changes, using a consistent client intake process is going to be more important than ever. And we're going to talk about that when we get to the Q&A and strategy session. The answer is in the form. Read the form. Review your MLS rules. I know this is like really fun stuff, but it's important. If you look at all the changes in the rules that are coming, they are immense. I can kind of assure you that the rule police at the MLSs are going to be hyper diligent as it comes to certain things as it relates to settlement. They're probably not going to be as forgiving on waiving of fees if there's a violation of anything that is directly related to the settlement. Don't create language. Okay, there's a couple of reasons why you don't want to do that. One of the biggest is oftentimes you're creating ambiguous language and you're trying to do your client a favor. You're trying to do, somebody said on one of the calls, I want to do a workaround. Don't create language. Your sense as an independent contractor, when you're in a situation that you're trying to resolve, you're like, I know what we'll do. We'll create an addendum to fix the situation. Okay, you don't want to do that. There's another practical reason. Most E&O carriers will not cover claims that result from using forms that have not had some sort of legal review. Okay, so don't create language. So by the way, let's dive in. Okay, so how do you get paid as a buyer broker? So the first thing, this might sound silly, but you need to have a written enforceable agreement. It has to be written and it has to be enforceable. In order for it to be enforceable, it has to have legal terms in it that are enforceable. So just because it's in writing, if there are term provisions, so again, this kind of goes back to the last one, there are companies out there that will create their own forms. And I'm not saying that's a bad idea, but what I am saying is if they're created without some sort of legal review, they may or may not be enforceable, okay? So one of the ways so the first thing is in order to get paid, you need to make sure that you have a written enforceable agreement. So one of the options is the buyer under the broker agreement can pay as obligated by the agreement. Okay, so that's one way, real simple. Buyer, you signed it, you're obligated to pay it. Okay, the other is that the buyer instructs you to utilize the RPA, the residential purchase contract. There's my translation. I know you all know what RPA means, unless maybe you're brand new, by the way. To ask the seller to pay for that amount that the buyer's obligated under the other agreement. Okay, so that's one way. We're going to cover that part of the contract here in a bit. A single party compensation agreement for an unrepresented seller. Okay, that form has existed for a really long time, and it will continue to exist. Now, I'm not going to open up a can of worms today, but I am going to tell you that you're going to hear from others in the industry and from your colleagues, and they may say something like, well, our company is doing an addendum to the listing agreement in which we're going to have compensation to buyer brokers. Okay, so and to be discussed later, meaning later, because ultimately this is a decision that every broker needs to make if they need to bridge that gap. So again, keep in mind that the June release of the RLA had in it buyer broker compensation language. That's now been stripped. So the forms you'll see next week and today do not have any mention of that. So if the seller says to you, hey, no, I want to offer it and I want to offer X, 2.5%, there's nowhere to put it. Okay, so there may be another way, but we're not going to discuss that today. But when I was a young manager in my mid 30s, I used to think, oh, I know what I'll do. I just will pretend with my agents that there's a real world out there that doesn't exist. Well, then they'd go to the real world, and what would happen? Oh, well, Joe and Fred are doing over at ABC. Okay, so you're gonna probably hear this. There's going to be discussions around it, and as my good friend Linda White often says, by the way, if you're in mixed company and they're talking specifically about commission rates, you should. I think Linda spills the glass of water and leaves. Okay, because that's a big no-no. But there's going to be discussion around this. I can tell you that. I got some texts after the call that I was just on around this very topic. Okay, are you sitting down? Okay, so here's the list of forms. They're all acronyms. I just copied this from CAR. These are all the forms. We're not going to go over all these today, so you don't have to panic. Okay, we're gonna touch on the ones that are predictably you're going to use the most. Okay, but this is the laundry list that had some impact from the settlement. Okay, so today's forms, I'm going to go through the agency very briefly. I'm not going to cover the whole form. And if we were all live right now, I'd say, well, why do you think we'd want to go over that form today? And one of you bright people would say, you're all bright, by the way, would say, well, because that's the first form that a customer should sign, right? In fact, at the beginning of that form, it says when you begin a discussion or enter into a discussion, and it literally says that on the top of the form. So we're going to go through that. We're going to go through some of the gap forms, the forms that you're most likely going to need to use between July 24th and D-Day on your MLS. We're going to talk about the BCA, the Broker Commission Advisory. Okay, what that form does for you and what the form does for your customer. We're going to talk about the VRBC, and there's a related form that's a little shorter. We're going to talk about the RPA, not the entire RPA, because that's a class in of itself, right? We're going to talk about the specific changes that are going to have the most impact on you. Okay, we're going to talk about the same thing about the RLA. We're going to talk about the grid. We're going to talk about offers of compensation that have gone bye-bye. What do you do if you double end it? Do you have a commission structure there historically? What do you do with unrepresented buyers? Concessions in the MLSA, which is a new form in paragraph 5, so on and so forth. So this is the crux of really what we're going to go over in our time together today. Okay, when I was at your market center last, I learned how to spell the word segue. Chrome segue. So here's what we're going to do. So by the way, as we're going through this, and I don't know if Stephanie, if you've shut the chat down or not, if you're taking notes and you have your questions, go ahead and put them there. I can't monitor chat, but certainly if we want to answer some of the questions when we get to the Q&A that have been recorded in chat, that's not necessarily a bad idea. All right, so here we go. So the first piece, actually I'm going to back up right quick. So if you go to CAR, you can log in and see literally every single form that is going to release next week. Now, CAR.org, and I'm not going to give a demonstration, but to be very candid, there were times in my career where I rarely, if ever, went to the CAR website. So some of you listening may or may not even know what your login information is. Okay. Some of the resources I'm going to share toward the tail end today is you're going to need to know how to log in. Okay. So that's just an aside. So literally, if you go in, you'll be able to see literally every form that's part of the release coming up, the actual form itself. Okay. The other part, again, this is just CAR, talks about July 10th. Hey, we're past that, right? That's when they release the forms in terms of for review. And then the 24th is when they will have them for release in zip forms, SkySlope, whatever your platform is that you're using for your forms. August 17th, again, is the deadline for the MLSs to make their modifications and changes. And then there's scheduled town halls, although they said the one today was the last one, so on and so forth. So I'm not here to be pro or anti-CAR, quite candidly. There are some areas of criticism that I personally have, and there's some areas that I would commend them. One of the areas that I would commend them would be that they've done a really nice job of recording many and of the town halls. Okay, so you literally can log in and review those posts today. CAR classes in education, they're offering some free form classes on the buyer broker as well as the RLA and the associated forms. Okay, so now I'm going to go to my favorite form because it is the first form that every customer should sign. And it says this, okay? It says when you enter, and this is really important. There was some discussion today on this town hall that I was on for brokers, and they were talking about when the some of the documents should be introduced or not introduced, and so on and so forth. And some of them had to do with agency. And I'm thinking, I don't say anything on these things. I just listen. But I'm thinking to myself, well, the form itself says when you enter a discussion, okay, regarding a real estate transaction, you should from the outset understand the types of agency. Agency has always been important. It's always been misunderstood. It's always been miscommunicated, I believe, by our industry. And yet it's the first thing that they should understand. Because if a consumer is going to make a decision, do I want single representation or dual, I might want to know what the heck that is. Now, it's always been important, and I believe it's going to be even more important in the new world when we start, as the commission and representation is really being bifurcated between seller commission and buyer commission. Okay. So seller's agent, buyer's agent, agent representing both buyer and seller. Okay. Now, one of the things that I want to emphasize simply is this, and then we're going to go to the first form. So part of our practice at our small firm is we send out, and I'm going to show you at the end of our conversation today, a real world email that I just sent to a potential seller last week. Okay. And I sent them a handful of forms. Okay. The first form that I sent them was the agency disclosure. And I said, here's what I've attached. Here's what they are. And by the way, this is important so you can make a decision what sort of representation you want. Okay. Now, I've said this, and I said this in your market center when I was down there. I think that was April last. But if you represent a buyer or a seller, you have a fiduciary. If you represent the seller to the seller and a buyer to the buyer, and I would just want to read what the form says. It says that if you represent if you're a seller's agent, that you have a fiduciary duty of utmost care, integrity, honesty, and loyalty in dealings with the seller. That's a simple sentence, but it's huge, because what this says is your fiduciary duty is competency, utmost care, and then integrity, honesty, and loyalty are character traits. So embedded, you could actually strike that form out. Don't do that because this is a state mandated form and it's written the way they say it has to be written, but you could actually write the word trust there. Okay.
Hey, Chris, are we supposed to be seeing the form? Because all it says is Chrome segue. We don't see the form unless you're wanting us to pull our own forms.
Oh, that's funny. Hang on. Oh, okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's really good. Yes, you're supposed to be seeing that form. So hang on. Can you see me now?
I can see you.
Okay, good. That's a start.
Wait, I'll put me so you can see me.
All right, here we go. Let's see here.
Okay.
I'm going to go here. We're going to go here. Okay. Let me do this. Is that really Jimmy Stewart?
We got Jimmy Stewart and Robert Redford.
All right, let's see. Hang on here. Why is my share not sharing the way I want to? Hang on here 1 sec. So let me do this. And then I'm going to do Zoom. And I'm going to do this. Here you see my photos. There's that. There's a demand. There's that. Hang on.
We call Kyle for you, Chris.
Oh, you're funny, Linda. There's a disturbance in the forest. Hang on. All right, so let me pull my Zoom or my Chrome up. It's up. I'm going to go back to the. Well, would you look at there? Kyle just helped me, Linda. Thank you for that. Okay. All right. So there we go. So right here. So if you read the form right here, it says, everybody can see that form now, yes?
Yep.
You guys can see
there.
that? Okay, beautiful, beautiful. Okay, great. So right there, it says a fiduciary of utmost care, integrity, honesty, and loyalty. We use this on the selling side. When we go out and talk to a buyer or a seller, and we talk about what really an agent is obligated to do, we literally use this part of the form to educate them as to how they should select what we call a highly qualified real estate professional. Okay, so this is, I call this the forgotten form. Even though we use it all the time, no one pays much attention to it. I'm going to suggest that in a selling situation, many and most of these forms can be utilized to help you secure a transaction or you cause the consumer to think slightly different. All right. So the first big change we're going to go to is the BCA, the Broker Compensation Advisory. This is one where I will give some good marks to the CAR for coming out with this form or a form like this, right? Because it actually explains to us when we read it and explains to the consumer how the commission actually works. Now, the first one, and this is a biggie. Now, in California, we've had, since I can remember, and I'm pretty sure forever, we've had in every single form when it talks about commission, the negotiability of commission as required by the state of California, 10-point bold type, blah, blah, blah. So, by the way, that's in the residential listing agreement, and it's also in the buyer representation and broker compensation agreement. But this is now bringing it to life for people to understand. Now, this is really important. I still think there's a misunderstanding. Okay, a real estate brokerage can charge whatever amount of commission they want to charge. This concept of negotiability means that broker A, B, and C can't legally come together and say, hey, let's all charge the same rate. Okay, so if a brokerage has a standard that they do not want to negotiate from, they don't have to negotiate from that standard. Okay, so if a broker says we charge 6% or 5% or 4% or whatever the number is, and that's our standard, that's our policy, we don't deviate, we don't have sales. There is no law that requires that. Now, the reason I say it like that is because I've had many consumers that I've been speaking with who think that, well, you have to negotiate. No, you don't. You don't have to negotiate. You just can't collude or conspire. Okay. So this talks about the fact, first and foremost, that that the commissions are negotiable. It's also optional additional compensation if buyer is unrepresented. When we get to the listing agreement in a little bit, there's going to be a question about, well, what's the compensation if there's an unrepresented buyer? Okay, and it says right here that a listing agreement may include optional additional compensation amounts owed to the seller's broker for situations where the broker takes on additional responsibilities or workload. So the theory there is if you have an unrepresented buyer, okay, who remains unrepresented, we know that it's going to require more work because that person doesn't know what the heck they're doing. Okay, and then in this provision, it talks about the buyer non-agency form and how and where it's going to be important to use that form. And then it talks about the fact that the broker may represent both buyer and seller, i.e. dual agency, which again is a good reason why we should present them with the agency disclosure first. California law, at least as of today, allows the brokerage to represent both the buyer and the seller. This is another one where there's been a lot of confusion historically between, because a lot of times it won't say broker, it'll say agent, for example, on the agency confirmation, right? But any agent within your brokerage who writes buyer and seller, it's a dual agency, okay? So this form, by the way, should be given to both buyers and sellers so that they can begin to understand what this is all about. Then it goes into the buyer agreements. Buyer's representation compensation is fully negotiable. And then it tells them that story. Okay. Now I like this sentence right here, and I would actually use this and highlight this. It says right here where my cursor is, I'm gonna blow this up a little bit. It says when negotiating compensation, the parties may discuss factors such as broker's expertise and experience, the type of broker services to be performed, so on and so forth. But they've put in this form, so when we start to communicate to people, the form says that essentially, to a degree, the value in the agent should be probably correlated to their expertise. Now, what we say, it's our experience, our talent, skills, and knowledge. Our talent, skills, and knowledge. Okay, this says broker's expertise, the type of broker service to be performed. I think it's a really good sentence to bring to life in your conversations with people, at your listings presentations. Point this out, circle it for them, okay? Because it's sort of mixed in here, but it's a very powerful thing because there's a natural question. Would you pay more for somebody who is an expert with amazing experience versus somebody who has no idea what they're doing, right? So use the language in the contract for your benefit. And then the last part it talks about is the requirement for written agreements. Again, I'm going to encourage all of you to let the forms do the talking when the customer says, well, why is this? And you say, well, that's a great question. So here's why. Because pursuant to a nationwide class action settlement reached by the NAR, participants in multiple listing services are required to have written agreements, blah, blah, blah. And then it actually says here what I said earlier, that pursuant to legislation expected to become law in California in 25, all licensees showing a buyer any type of property will be required to have a written agreement.
I put everything in the.
Somebody's talking. Okay. Advantages of written agreements. Well, the big advantage is a written agreement establishes a clear mutual understanding, right? When enlisting a real estate broker to represent them, buyers agree to pay the buyer's broker when escrow closes. but the person responsible for payment may be negotiated in the transaction. This form again now outlines kind of the possibilities how that compensation can be paid. So buyer pays the compensation pursuant to the agreement. Seller pays the compensation. Buyer negotiates for the seller to compensate the buyer's broker. Okay, a buyer may make a conditional offer to the seller, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so this talks about the seller paying the responsibility. So when you get the buyer broker agreement signed, there's going to be a fee in there. Okay, so in the absence of anything else, the buyer's responsible for that payment. And we're going to go over that form too, at least portion of it. Okay, so buyer negotiates for the seller to compensate the buyer's broker. Number two, buyer's agent negotiates an agreement directly with the seller. Now, this is interesting. I was on a Zoom a couple of weeks ago, and there was a discussion, and it was on one of the broker town halls that they don't record, by the way. And there was an interesting discussion because the discussion was, well, gee, can an agent go directly to a listed seller and negotiate the terms of a single party compensation agreement? They talked about it for quite a bit, and they finally came out with a resolve. No, I don't think you can do that. You might have an agency issue and you might have an ethics issue, which I tend to agree with. But it was an interesting discussion that sort of threw the group for a loop. So what I want you to think about here is using a single party, as I said earlier, when you're talking about unrepresented sellers. Okay. Changing practice related to a seller broker offer compensation. Again, I'm going to say to you, let the forms do the talking for you. Copy and paste that historically many, at minimum, take it and wordsmith it where it still says the same thing. We don't have to invent new language is really the moral of that story. Okay. So buyers and sellers must separately negotiate compensation. So it talks about the fact, it doesn't say this, but what this says is that the mechanism for offers of compensation is being broken. And on those D dates in August, it will be officially broken. It's broken. Offers of compensation, the mechanism will be broken through the multiple listing service. Okay. And then they acknowledge a receipt of this document. So I'm gonna say what they should have done is they should have taken the beginning of the form and they should have started it out like the agency disclosure. And I should say, when you begin a discussion with a real estate professional, from the outset, you should understand how compensation works. So by the way, the form doesn't say that, but you can say that when you send it in your email. Okay, so this is a great form, and you'll see where it's referenced in a couple of the agreements that we're gonna touch on here. Okay, now we're gonna talk for a moment about the gap. Now, this is again maybe where stress starts going up. I have a broker that I'm going to go do a presentation for next Friday. She's a small broker. I've known her for a long time. We're not going to talk about specifics of commission because I'm not with her brokerage, but we are going to talk largely about the same thing. And I'm going to talk with her. In fact, I talked with her last night and I said, Ina, I would recommend that you tell your agents to begin to have the conversations like right now, if they haven't done it yet, for any existing listings that you have, and ultimately for any buyer broker agreements that you have. Okay, and so this form, which there is a current version of this form in the library, and they've made a couple of subtle changes to this. Now this is what I'm going to say though. You need to have a discussion with your team leader and or your broker as to how they want you to handle the disclosure and modification of any existing listing agreements. Because the reason this is important is because if you have a listing and you currently have offers of compensation in that listing agreement and language around that, and those offers of compensation, by the way, are through the multiple listing, and that's where they currently are, when the day hits, those are going away. The mechanism's broken. So we need to disclose that and then modify the terms of the existing agreement. The same thing is true of your buyer broker agreements. Okay. So that's something you want to get on top of. So on, yeah, I think you guys are the 13th. CRMLS is, I think, the 13th, right? You want to get on this. Okay. At minimum, you should be having a conversation with your people to say, hey, I wouldn't call it D-Day to them, but D-Day's coming, and here's what that's going to look like if you haven't done that yet. So communicate. So understand so that you can implement and communicate. That's the goal of today. So you need to understand that the form says this now. What's in that form now for offers of compensation through the MLS won't be happening on D-Day on the MLS. Therefore, that needs to be disclosed and or modified, and modify the listing agreement. Okay. Now, this little sentence here, and again, this is where stress starts coming up. Let's say you have a listing for 5%, and you have it 2.5 to the listing side and 2.5 offer of compensation. The question is now going to be this. Okay, well, Chris, wait a minute. I listed this house at 5%. You're going to take 2.5, and the other 2.5 is for those people out there. So, yeah. So I'll keep my listing with you, but I want the total compensation to your brokerage to still only be 2.5. So there's a little provision. Seller and broker agree that the compensation shall be reduced by the amount authorized to be offered in the MLS, or if you check it, shall not be reduced. Okay, you got that? So that's really important because the boilerplate says that it will be reduced. In order for it not to be reduced, that box must be checked. Is that exciting? Just a quick raise of hands or some signification. Take yourself off of mute. How many of you have begun this discussion with any sellers regarding this change and how it's going to relate to what's going to happen with commission in their existing agreement? Anyone?
Hi, this is Denise Marks. I've begun that conversation.
Good for you, Denise. Okay, so I'm going to encourage you, if you don't have these forms in with the red and with the changes, I'm going to encourage you to keep the forms with red because it's real easy for you to look at what the changes were post when they go, because when they go live next week, there won't be, the red will be gone. Okay. I like the red because it shows me pretty quickly that that was a change from something previous.
Hey, Chris,
okay.
Can you repeat where the red, where these forms are available? Because when you're showing them,
Yes.
they're cut off the top, so I'm not clear, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's because they're on my group. So what you're going to do, and this is at the end, I'm going to share with you how to go into car.org if you've not done so. When you log in, and I'm going to, Steph, if you want, I'll just push all these to you, and we'll set up a folder so you can access them there too. But at the end of this, and you're going to get a copy of this presentation too, but these aren't in the presentation officially though. But at the end of this, there's a resource thing, but we'll make sure you have them, okay?
So just the basic question is they're in car. They're not
They
in,
are in car.
they're not in the library though.
They'll be in the library. They'll be in the library the 24th.
But not with red.
Not with red.
Got it.
If you guys go to CAR right now, there's a really great drop-off box to the right. It just says click here for the forms, and
Yes,
you'll go
it
to
is.
everything that Chris is showing you.
Yep. But don't go there right now because we'll lose you.
Exactly.
Okay, great question. So I appreciate that. Okay, my sky slope went out. That's okay. All I was going to show you here is the existing form. So this one was revised in July, which will drop, and then the other one, the existing version is in the library now. Okay. But again, the key here is to begin. If you do nothing else after today, if you get on the phones and start calling your people to say, hey, we need to have a chat. So literally over 2 months ago, a client of my wife's who we don't have a buyer broker with her, She's a very busy attorney. She's got kids. They've been sick or bit, and we started calling all of our people, and she was our first call. And Kelly called and said, "Hello, Chasten. Hey, Chasten, I know you're super busy, but if we find you a home in the next 30 or 60 days, there aren't really any changes happening. But in the meantime, if it's post-August, we need to have a discussion on what that's going to look like. I'm going to send you some information, blah, 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 blah." We need to be having lots of conversations with existing clients. We need to be having conversation with potential clients. We should be at our open houses if we're doing those. I can tell you, I have a client right now from an open house who said this to me: "I don't save agent cards, but I'm saving yours. And the reason I'm saving yours is because everybody else I've talked to about this doesn't seem to know what the HE double hockey stick they're talking about." Okay. So I actually have a relationship with this guy now, and we're gonna sell him a house, right? So your expertise, there's a lot of people that will appreciate how well you know this stuff. So as silly as this sounds, read it and read it and read it and read it. Okay, a great question. So here's sort of the sister form. So any of your existing buyer representation, broker compensation agreements. And again, you'll see where the red says you will be solely responsible for the compensation amount in the BRBC unless another party agrees to pay that compensation. So I guarantee you right now, there are agents running around on the planet that have I got a buyer broker sign. I'm on a committee with one. I got a buyer broker sign. Oh, that's great. But when that mechanism gets broken and you're sitting there, surprise, hey, guess what? That amount of money that I told you 3 months ago we get paid through the MLS, I haven't been paying attention. So now you owe me that money. Isn't that great? You obviously don't want to be that agent, okay? So the red really, really helps on these things, okay? All right, so let's talk about the BRBC, the Buyer Representation and Broker Compensation Agreement. Now, I've been saying it wrong because I've been saying buyer broker agreement. Now, it is a buyer broker agreement, but it's more than that. It's a buyer representation and broker compensation agreement. Because for any of us that have been around the block long enough in this business, known that we've had broker rep agreements for some time. The question is, did they have compensation or didn't they? Okay. So now there's some other questions, but they're not around compensation. So this is the form you're going to use. So this is I'm going to go list a buyer. So what I want you to think about is funny. When I first came to Keller Williams back and some of you know I was with Keller for 3 years with my wife and son. And I read this great book by this guy by the name of Gary Keller. And it's called MREA, Millionaire Real Estate Agent. And he talks about models and systems and blah, 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 blah. And in it, he started talking about buyer listing. I'm like, what the hell is a buyer listing? And then I went to my first Bold class, and the Bold coach was talking about buyer listings. Well, the reason he was talking about that is because he was from a different state where they had buyer rep agreements for compensation, and they were listings. So what I want you to think about is you're listing the buyer. Now, your buyer legs and all sorts of other things, but you're listing a buyer. That's the best way, at least for me, to think about it. So you're going to put the date prepared. You're going to put their name. You're going to put your company's name. Okay. Now, this is where it gets really important. I'm going to blow this up. Exclusive. It grants forward living, whatever you guys call whatever we call ourselves, unless. So it's boilerplate non-exclusive. That's the boilerplate. And then it says this. It says exclusive is checked. It says it's non-exclusive unless exclusive is checked in paragraph 2A2 and then initialed in paragraph 15. Okay, so understand that this is why it's important, because somebody can go get something signed thinking that it's an exclusive and they didn't do the proper procedure, i.e. check the box and initial the paragraph. So key provisions here, 2A2. So I'm gonna ask everyone a question. This is rhetorical. You don't answer it out loud. So I want you to think, if we're gonna list a buyer like we list a property, I would be curious how many open listings you've taken as an agent, or non-exclusive listings for sellers in the last 1 year, 5 years, 10 years. I can bet you it's a pretty small number. So in my little pea brain, I'm thinking, well, why would I want to have a non-exclusive agreement as a business professional? Okay. Now, I'm not saying you're never going to have one, whatever the case may be. Ultimately, this is a business decision. Okay. But I would be thinking, at least I can tell you what we're thinking as our company. We're going to work with people that sign exclusive agreements. That's our decision, because we have too many other things to do than run around with others. That may not be your decision, but just know that the boilerplate is non-exclusive. Okay. The items in this paragraph are contractual terms of the agreement. Reference paragraphs provide further explanation. So a couple of decisions that you need to make. What's the representation period? It's not enforceable. If you remember that, it has to be in writing, has to be enforceable. In order for it to be enforceable, it has to have, just like a listing, a beginning or end date, okay, or completion of the transaction. It can't exceed 3 months. It says that it's void if it does. So make sure that if you're going to err on the date, make sure you err inside of 3 months, not 3 months and 2 days, because you counted wrong. Okay. Now here's paragraph A2. It says non-exclusive unless the box is checked, and then it says valid only if. Okay. The property to be acquired, broker, including any associates working through broker on the buyer on behalf of the buyer, provide services of the types of properties listed below. Okay. I'm going to suggest that you, unless it's something your doesn't cover, don't check it, right? But single family residence, but if you don't check multifamily, and so they're like, well, I want to buy a duplex. Now, I think these things only come in if somebody wants to try to get out of the deal. If you're working with people that want to work with you, they're generally not trying to figure a way to get out of the deal anyhow, right? But I would err on the side of paranoia a little bit, and I would include more checks than not. Okay. You're going to include what area. By the way, I don't think this is an easy one. You can put the county, you can put the counties, you can put the cities, so on and so forth. Now, I said earlier that I believe, and we've used input sheets for both buyers and sellers for a long time. Okay, so when I look at forms like BIPP, to be very candid, I'm not even sure why I need that form, because I already have the identification as part of that. The interesting part of this is only part of the contract if it's checked, and then it's really not anything other than a list of what the buyer's priorities are. So I'm going to have you look through that form yourself. What I would recommend that you do, if you don't already have an input form, is you take some of that information and you put it on a really cool form. And we use Jot form that some of you know. You can send them out as part of your presentation prior to meeting with them, to have them go through the agency, the broker compensation, advisory, so on and so forth. Okay. If there's any properties that are excluded from representation, they're either going to put them here, you're going to put them on a attached list. Oh, and then by the way, here's another notice about our commission, broker compensation. They are set by each broker individually. Now, this is very interesting. As I've watched this unfold, you'll see that the verbiage is slightly different every time you read about our compensation. I'm not sure why it is. I actually like this one the best, because it says they are set by each broker individual and may be negotiable between buyer and broker. Okay. There's our form that we already discussed. See attached broker compensation advisory. So for us, one of the things that we're doing as part of our system and process is we push out to them the agency disclosure form. We push out to them the BCA. We push out to them some of the other generic disclosures. We push out to them several forms, and I'll share an email later as it relates to that. Okay, now we get to the fun part. Now we're going to put in our compensation amount. Okay. It's going to be 3%. It's going to be 2%, and if any. Okay. Or you might have an attached compensation schedule. You know, if you buy a property during a full moon, it's 3%. If it's a waxing, no, I'm just kidding, right? But that's where you would do it. Okay. I would, as best you can, keep it as simple and straightforward for the customer as you can. I think that saves a lot of things. Payments from other brokers. If the broker receives compensation from seller or others, the broker's representation of buyer, the amount shall be credited against the buyer's obligation to pay. And that's in 4G. Buyers shall not receive any amount in excess of 2E1. Okay, so that's what I said earlier. So if that's part of the settlement. So if you're thinking, well, why is that? It's because that was part of the practice change in the settlement. There's a continuation period, really important, because the question is, well, what happens if my agreement of 90 days, excuse me, I said it wrong, 3 months, expires or is expiring? What do I do? Okay, well, there's a continuation period for properties that you've introduced them to, so on and so forth. So you're going to want to put a continuation that's reasonable. I don't know what that word means, by the way. When I first got in the business on the listing side, they would have us put in 90 days for listing continuation. Okay, cancellation is another big one, non-exclusive. So if it's a non-exclusive right, the boilerplate is that the cancellation is effective upon receipt, or you can check the box, the number in. If it's exclusive, it's boilerplate with no checkbox, cancellation effective 30 days after receipt. So let's say you have an exclusive agreement signed, you're 3 weeks into it, and they say, hey, we're canceling. That cancellation under exclusive is not effective for 30 days. Now, you might make a decision, a business decision, to let them out early because you don't want to deal with it, whatever the case may be. So you can always make business decisions around some of these time frames. Okay. Now, the next part is an interesting one. We're not going to dive deep into this today because we just don't have time. But this is the amount of time that the buyer has to get you their financial information. Okay. And then we're going to look at paragraph 9B here in a minute, where it is going to talk about some key things with respect to some of these items. Okay. So in 9B, it's basically going to say that they are to do the following within 5 days. So I'm guessing most every one of you, when you begin to work with your buyers, you probably get things like proof of funds, lender letters. Anyhow, this form is designed to have it get completed. You do not have to use it. Okay. If you are going to use it, you check it, and then they're supposed to complete it within those 5 days. Okay. Now this is where it starts to get fun. So in our team discussions, what we talked about is some categories of buyers in terms of payment of compensation. So there are buyers who have the financial wherewithal to pay a buyer's broker, but just don't want to. There are buyers who have the financial wherewithal to pay a broker, and they're more than willing to. There are there are buyers who don't have the money to pay you, and they want to. And then you have people who don't have the money and don't want to pay you. Now, you can make your own business decision which type of clients you'd like to work within those four. But if they don't have the money and they don't want to pay you, there is sort of a thing around, gee, I'm not sure if we want to work together because you really don't want to pay me anyhow, and you don't have the money. Okay. So those are the four groups that we put everybody into in our mind when it comes to this. there is a provision here that also then relates. So if you're sitting there talking with somebody, you have a first-time buyer, somebody that doesn't have, you know, the proverbial two nickels to rub together, you are most likely going to check this box that says buyer does not have sufficient funds to pay broker. And then when we get to paragraph 9 here in a minute, we'll see what that has to do with. Okay, so 2G1 and 2G2 are related to paragraphs 9B. So again, this is the grid, and then 9B it lays down the rules, the contractual rules between the broker and the buyer in this case. Oh, there you go. The broker compensation advisory is attached right there. Oh, guess what? The amount of rate. So again, now it's going to compensation. We're telling them again. Okay. Now I'm going to go back to the top of the form for a second. The reason is because up here, it said that an exclusive is checked 2A2 and initialed in 15. So we're going to pass up paragraph 9 for a moment. We'll come back, don't you worry. And we'll go to 15. So if you're going to have an exclusive agreement, the box needs to be checked. And this paragraph, which hits it squarely on the head, so the consumer doesn't say, I didn't know. That's why this provision is here. Okay. And it actually has sort of a non-compete in it. Buyer shall not enter another representation agreement in conflict with this agreement. And then it talks about compensation again. So if we're doing our job properly, and this is the point where we have to be very confident, like a really good doctor or surgeon, that we're the best one at the job, and we are very comfortable talking about our compensation. Not braggadocious, not cocky, but I know that I'm a professional I'm a real estate professional, okay? And so I'm very comfortable talking about conversations. I'm very comfortable having conversations about compensation, okay? So let's go back to paragraph 9. Now, again, you'll see we're not going to go through all the red today because there's a lot. So you all have homework, okay? Oh, paragraph 9. Paragraph 9. So this is the paragraph, and we're only going to talk about B for today. Okay, this is the one that says when the time specified in 2G, which the boilerplate is 5 days, they're going to provide the following information. Okay, and then we're going to go to paragraph 2. Paragraph 9B2. If either box is checked in 2G2, meaning buyers telling you, I don't have the money to pay you, for any property for which the buyer writes an offer to purchase, buyer agrees to include a term in buyer's offer requesting seller to compensate buyer's broker. And for a transaction, this agreement is contingent upon seller or others or both agreeing to pay broker the full amount that the buyer's contractually obligated to pay the broker. So if they don't have the money and that box is checked, this gives you the right to then use the RPA, which we're going to touch on in a minute here, so that you can request the seller pay the amount of commission that the buyer is obligated to pay under the buyer agreement that they've signed with you. Okay? So you want to know this form really well so you can speak to it well when you're walking a buyer through it. Okay, but understand the big provisions really, I mean, they're all big, but the biggest provisions: how long is the agreement going to be? What type of representation is it going to be? Your compensation, what is the amount going to be? Right? So on and so forth. Are they able to pay you or are they not able to pay you? Okay. And then it goes into all the nuances of payments received from others less than the buyer compensation obligation. So it goes through all those scenarios. So I want to go back to one of the things that I said earlier in terms of remember on my notes. I said remember, and it was the first thing I put, the consumer. If you can imagine for a minute as you're going through this, going, wow, my brain's getting a little dizzy, going through all this, and trust me, it will. If it's not now, it will, even because as you go and you're going to go, okay, now this says this and this says this, I need like a flow chart. Imagine how the customer must feel. So it's a great investment of our time so that we can speak to these forms in this language and bring it to life. That increases your value, in my estimation, in the marketplace without question. Okay. Now there's another form that's I'm going to call it a lukewarm version of the BRBC, and it's this little guy here, or gal, property showing a representation agreement. Okay, this is a non-exclusive agreement, by the way. So just know that. Okay, so we're not going to go into this in great detail. It's I guess the good news is it's only effectively it's a 3-page form, but really practically it's a two-page form in terms of real content. Okay. Now I do have a friend who's in leadership at another brokerage, big box brokerage, and they have their own, at least they did. Some of these things may change. Their own buyer broker agreement. So if history is an indicator of what will happen in the future, what will likely happen is you will talk to peers, you'll see things, whatever, and you'll get a document. You'll say, "Hey, can we use this? Hey, how do we do this?" Right? And those are some of those things that discussions can be had around. But part of it has to do with how you're covered for legal and blah 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 blah. Okay, let's go to the residential purchase agreement. All right, we're going to look here at not the whole thing. That's a whole class. We're going to look at the little, where am I at here? There we go. 3G. I think I wrote 2G, so I apologize for that error if you see that in the notes. It's 3G3. 3G3. And that seller agrees to pay the obligation of buyer so the obligation is the buyer to compensate buyer's broker under a separate written agreement. And then it says CAR form SPBB is attached. And we're going to look at that one here in a moment. Okay. So now there's a lot of discussion about this. Oh, can't you just use the concession field? Yes, there's a lot of ways you can do this. Okay, you can actually use 3G1 theoretically for commission, at least is what they're saying. I would recommend, though, when you're talking specifically, because it's nice and clean, you don't have any potential issues with closing cost overages with lenders on loans. Lenders have apparently weighed in and said that if this box is checked, they definitely won't count it against the buyer for closing cost allowance, so on and so forth. The key here is to make sure that if the buyer is going to request the seller to pay for the obligation under the agreement they've signed with you, that this box gets checked and then this form is used. Okay. So it's not a difficult form at all. It's the parties. It's made part of the RPA. Seller agrees to pay. You put the amount in there, and there's a note about the maximum seller payment obligation. There's a question about, well, gee, do you have to provide the agreement? Well, you do if they ask for it, because they're only obligated to pay that which is in the agreement. Okay. Now, there are modification forms to all these agreements, just like there are currently with the residential listing agreement. Everything else, you can modify terms. So if there's a situation, so let's say I call Jasmine and say, "Hey, Jasmine, it's Chris. How you doing? Hey, to catch you at a good time. Hey, I got a buyer for your 123 Elm Street. You co-oping on that darn thing? I hope so. Please, please, please. oh yeah, well, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, we're willing to pay 3%. I say, okay, cool. Oh shoot, I only got to buy, I'm thinking to myself, I only got to buy our broker agreement for 2. Okay, hey buyer, here's the deal. We're going to write this offer. I'd like to modify the terms of the agreement and change it to 3 because they've said they'll pay me more. Now that's like raw way to say it. Okay, but just understand that there's a gap. If your agreement's here and the seller's willing to do this, just understand that that in theory you don't get that higher amount. That's part of the terms of the settlement, and that's what all the paperwork says. Okay. The old agreement didn't.
Excuse me,
Yeah.
I got confused with that. So are you then allowed to ask the buyer if you could redo the compensation or not? I got a little confused.
Well, so in theory, I think it's an awkward conversation, candidly. Okay, in theory, what you would do, so let's say in that scenario, Jasmine says, oh yeah, they're willing to do 3%, which by the way, just because she says it until they've agreed to it in writing doesn't mean cotton picking thing, right? But she's had a conversation, they've said 3%, and this is in the absence of any addendum that the seller has signed specifically for that. Again, we're not gonna talk about that today. So there's a gap, okay? So what you could do is go to your buyer and say, hey, buyer, we're going to make this ask, and the agent has just told me that they'll pay more than that. Would you be okay if we modify the terms of your agreement? And if they say, sure, Chris, you're awesome. We'd love you to earn more money because you work with so hard and so on and so forth. Then you're going to do a modification of terms to your BRBC. Now, I'm going to restate what I said. It's a little bit of an awkward conversation. Okay. So if I'm negotiating, I would plan on writing a higher number in your BRBC and work down off a higher number. Okay. Because the natural question from the buyer might be, well, how much of that money do I get? Do I get any of that extra?
On our legal call yesterday, they mentioned that if you can qualify it with practices that you're offering in your service to them, it would
Sure.
be more legal.
Yes. It would be more legal.
You'd be able to defend the request of the buyer to increase the compensation amount because
Sure.
you're giving it a qualifiable practice in that increase.
Yes. In that, by the way, that may or may not be the case. And so I'm not really going to render on that specifically, because if that's true, and I wouldn't want to argue an attorney because I'm not one, then the opposite would have to be true in terms of when you start going downwards. But I don't think, I mean, my humble answer is I don't think they really know. What they should say, I'm surprised they didn't say this, is that you should check with your own legal counsel at your brokerage, because by the way, they're saying that more and more and more. So for example, if you want to create an addendum for offers of compensation, not through the MLS, and a brokerage is going to create that, CAR's point right now is we're not going to help you create that language. You got to go talk to your own attorney about that. Yes, Jasmine.
So for the purpose of that example that we had, if the buyer agrees to the modification and somehow that deal unravels, that new modification sets the precedent for your agreement moving forward.
It's the new amount.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, candidly, I mean, again, some of these things are business decisions, because it might be one of those things where you go back to your buyer and you say, hey, here's the deal. I know you don't have a lot of money. They're willing to pay 3%. I'll go ahead and take my 2, and we're going to go ahead and ask for another 1% for you, for your buyer's closing costs, whatever, right? So yeah, so understand this. A lot of this is, we have ventured into the unknown in many of these things. Again, these are not laws. These are practice changes that are being implemented to comply with the terms of the settlement, which haven't been okayed yet, and there's still a lot of question marks. Okay. So by the way, at minimum, I do believe it's an awkward conversation, but yes, you can have the conversation. You can modify it in writing, I believe. And to Jasmine's point, once you modify it, it is now higher for subsequent deals if that one doesn't go. Okay, let's look at the RRLA right quickly. So for you forms experts that have been going through blow by blow, you know that last month there was some different language in this document. Okay, so this is where some of the awkwardness that's existing right now and some anxiety and to some degree, some levels of anger within the broker population as they sit on some of these town halls. They are frustrated largely with, some are, not all, that CAR isn't doing something like they had in June with respect to brokers' compensation to a cooperating broker, not through the MLS, of course. Okay, so term of listing agreement. So again, listing period. So one big change is what? The grid. It's now a grid. Okay, so understand that a lot of the concepts in general, and I'm scrolling through this new form, you will see a lot of black. Okay, and the reason is because a lot of the concepts, with the exception of the topics that we've been talking about related to the settlement, a lot of the concepts haven't changed, right? So they changed the look of it dramatically to hopefully make it simpler for everyone. So again, when you get down to your notice or your compensation paragraph, 2C, oh, guess what? Notice the amount above it. So this is like the 16th time we've told them. Oh, and then by the way, here's the BCA. Okay. So now it starts talking about the compensation. Now understand, I look at the BCA a little bit like the DIA, the Disclosure Information Advisory, which CAR provides, which explains to a seller how to complete their disclosures, their TDS correctly per the statute. It's kind of that same thought with the BCA. What it starts to tell people is, here's what this form is, or here's how compensation works. So to be very candid, I would make sure that a potential seller had the information in the BCA likely at minimum simultaneously with this document and not buried 16 pages later. And I'm going to show you an email that we're using in the real world to bring that document to life. So you'll see that it keeps talking about the BCA. That's to educate us about how commission works, and most importantly, ultimately, how to explain to the customers how commission compensation works. Okay, so this is a seller compensation agreement, period, end of story. That's what you need to understand when you're talking about compensation now. If you were looking at the June release, there were a couple of other boxes here that had co-op language and amounts in here. There were some other they're gone. They're not there. Okay. So understand the BRBC has the buyer's compensation, or the broker's compensation from the buyer, and the RLA has the seller's compensation payable to us. There is no mixing of metaphors anymore. Gone. So unless you have a different listing agreement or an addendum or something else, this is the only option. Okay. So with that, you're going to fill out that 4B, excuse me, C1. 4B talks about C1. Then you're going to talk with them about unrepresented buyers. And you want to get familiar with another form that I have somewhere here, the non-agency form. Okay, the theory is, I suppose, is CAR believes that we're going to be dealing potentially with more non-represented buyers. Okay, the future will tell if that's true or not. But if so, there's language here to add additional compensation to seller's broker if the buyer is unrepresented. Thank you very much. Okay. There's a continuation, and then there's the seller obligation to pay previous brokers.
So Chris,
Yes.
it's Louisa. So you're basically saying that as a listing agent, I can say, okay, I can charge, I'm charging 3% if I'm, if a buyer is represented, but I will charge you an additional if we get a buyer that's not represented.
Represented, correct.
Okay.
So
So-
there's a couple
Got it.
ways you can do this depending on how your brain goes. So for example, let's say, I'm going to give you guys a weird number. Let's say I'm a broker who charges currently 5.5% total. I charge 5.5% total, and of that, for everything that we do on the listing side, we keep 3, and then we offer through offer of compensation currently through the multiple listing service 2.5. Let's say that's the scenario. So 3 plus 2.5, seller's paying 5.5 in that scenario. So in the new world, when the mechanism is officially broken, an option could be that I write in 5.5% here. Okay, because this is the question. Because in the theory behind the suits and the settlements and everything else, if this is supposed to save people money, I don't know if it will. Because if I write 5.5 here, well, for me that probably takes care of this other side, unrepresented side potentially, and it also takes care of dual agency. Okay. Which I can also change by, I can attach a compensation addendum, blah, 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 blah. But if you're going to do that part, that needs to be reviewed to make sure that it's in writing, it's legal, it's enforceable, and there aren't any other issues with it. Okay. So you've got to figure out what the number that's going to go here, because if you've been doing this long enough, your brain is stuck on that number that you've been putting up, knowing that a portion of that's going to go away. So part of this might be, hey, seller, what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and let's do 5.5%. And what I'll do with your okay, everything is always with the customer's okay, is when my phone rings and Jasmine says, hey, is your seller willing to? I've already built in some number here. And by the way, I'm not hiding anything because I've already had the discussion with my client. It's no different than what we're doing now. So then when the offer comes and they ask for 2.5%, my seller's not going, I ain't paying that 2.5%. That's a bunch of crap. I ain't doing that. Okay. There's a lot of ways to go through that. So what you need to do as an individual agent is think about what your compensation looks like, and then how can you speak to it when you're sitting at the kitchen table with the customers. So it's what you put in the blank and coupled with what are you articulating to people.
Okay, so it's like in essence, I can put, well, I'm gonna charge you 6% if I do it all. If I get a buyer, even if it's not like, and then that's represented, and then charge an additional like 3% for someone that's not represented. So basically, I'm gonna get like 9%.
Well, in theory, you could do
right?
that.
Okay.
I probably wouldn't do that. I would probably, if I'm going to go with a higher number here, let me just say it this way: if I make a decision as an agent to put in the number that I'm currently charging sellers with co-op, and I still do that in the future, I'm likely not going to then say, oh, by the way, if somebody's unrepresented, I'm gonna charge you another amount. Okay. But in theory, there's no max rate set here. They just have to understand what's going on. But the point of 2C2, thank you, Chris. 2C2 is not for dual agent, is not for representing both buyer and seller. This is unrepresented, and you need to make sure that you use the appropriate forms if you get. And Stephanie actually and I were chatting about something a couple of days ago on this very. You guys have a live one actually in your office. Now, okay, so again, one of the tips is read and reread and reread, and then you want to practice articulating it. And the best way I think you can practice is call your current people, start walking through the documents. Don't make up language, just speak in plain language. If you're not sure, so for example, Susie, to your question, you go, okay, what do I talk about here? Okay, then I go down to paragraph 4B, compensation, seller agrees to pay broker, the amount specified in 2C1. That's pretty simple. Okay, great. But that's what's on the grid, and I'm assuming you all know this, but I won't assume. So there's the paragraph here, and then there's what the language is tied to that part of the grid. Okay, so the point here is the mechanism's broken. When the mechanism gets officially broken, and you're using this form, and this is where there's going to be a gap, because one of the forms is going away as of next week when the release comes, is the CBC form, the Cooperating Brokerage Commission form. So in the gap, okay, you go out and list, so let's say brand X goes out and lists a property next Friday on this new form. There's no offer of compensation in this form for the buyer's broker unless they create an addendum or something else, okay? But there's still offers of compensation available through the multiple listing service. So we have a gap. So there's going to be an awkward time here going through this. So this is where we're just going to have to figure it out. Okay. So there's some things here on the timing that aren't ideal. Okay. The other part to this form is they've taken out the language specifically in the form. One earbud just died. Out the language. Can you guys hear me? Okay, good. They've taken out the language with respect to the MLS. Okay. I'm not sure why they did it the way they did it. Again, I'm not an attorney, but to me, what this says, it says the property will be marketed in the MLS. Okay. And then it says, see the attached form, or excuse me, it doesn't say attached. It says see car form. Okay. So it's actually not an attachment, which is interesting. It just says see the form. Somebody asked that today on the call. But since you're dying of curiosity, here's the form. Okay. So it's largely the same language with some exception. So the concession fields, which are, it appears that most, if not all MLSs will have concession fields. The boilerplate for concessions, it says the seller does not authorize broker to put in the MLS that the seller is willing to offer concessions. So you have to check a box where the seller authorizes you to offer concessions through the MLS. So if you use this form boilerplate, or when you use this form boilerplate, and you don't check the box and you say in the comments that and check the field that you're willing, that the seller's willing to offer concessions, which by the way, compensation is a concession, is what everyone's being told, then you're violating what the agreement says between you and the seller. Okay. All right. So what we're going to do. Yep. So I don't know who's in. I guess you guys are in charge of. You guys are good because you.
Chris, I have a question regarding that.
Yes.
E1,
Yes.
EE1. When it's asking property will be marketed in the following MLS primary, is that where we're just stating the name of our MLS?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So currently, and I don't think it says it quite like that on the current listing agreement.
No,
but
it
there's
doesn't.
that area where you fill in the, like, in Sacramento, it's Metro List, right?
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that's done because the sellers need to know. So, for example, an agent flies down to your market, lists a property in Calabasas, and they're not a member of the association. They stick it in, Shasta County. That's probably not the greatest thing for the seller, and they would probably need to be aware of that. All right, so let's have a free-for-all now. I'm going to show you a couple of quick things as we're unmuting. So I'm going to go back if I can do it this time. I got to go back to here. I got to go back to. All right, so let's go ahead and go into questions. So by the way, what do you all see right now?
The MLS listing, multiple listing service.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, so we're going to go here. And we're going to go back to here. And we're going to go here. Okay, now what do you see? Chrome segue?
Yes.
Okay, beautiful. Okay, that's what I want you to see. Okay, so I'm going to go through a couple things as you're thinking about questions. So now what? So when I managed a very large real estate office years and years ago, I had a big banner, and on it said, "Prospecting solves everything." That's a little bit of an oversimplification, but I'm a big believer that when stress comes into a market, and we have had several this last couple of years, that the amount of lead generation and prospecting you do can offset, because there's going to be more people who say either I can't afford to pay you, I don't want to pay you, whatever, that you may have to go get somebody else to get paid and make a living. Okay, so prospecting solves everything. Make sure that you're checking with your broker TL on policies, so that you're not putting yourselves in the brokerage and your client into harm's way. Read a lot, ask questions, learn. Some of you have sat through my 7 steps to great buyer and sellers presentations, but again, have a system, develop, refine your questions, your communication, and your packages, and start communicating to everyone. If you're at an open house, if you're knocking doors, you're talking to your people, you're making calls to your database, you are communicating what the heck is going on in this world, okay? Because the stress is not going to go down between now and D-Day and the MLSs, is it? Okay, so over communicate, okay? You don't always have to have the perfect answer. If you aren't sure, say something like this. You know what? That's a great question. I'm really glad you asked. And I'd rather give you the right answer than a quick answer. So let me get back to you on that one. I don't care how long you've been. My wife is amazed. Well, for many reasons. No, I'm just kidding. My wife is amazed because at this point in my career, often say, you know what? That's a great question. And oftentimes I know the answer, like 99.999%. And I go, you know what? That's a great question, but let me double check before I give you that answer. Okay. That's called professional confidence. Okay. Here are some of the resources. And again, Stephanie has this. So if you click on, thank you for whoever piped in. But if you go to CAR, has some great resources on this. The form release, the town halls that they said the last ones today, but they'll probably keep doing them. I have the broker one here. And they are doing some training specifically on this form. The biggest thing I can say, though, is read. Here are the bundles that are coming out. And again, you're going to get copies of all these slides. The RPA, the RLA, the BRBC, and that's everything that's going to be bundled. And don't rely just on the bundles. So for example, you'll see here that so in theory, what's going to happen is the BRBC is going to have the BCA combined, but when I get to the RPA, I'm going to probably send it again. Okay, now I'm going to just share with you this email that I sent. You can see I sent it Sunday, July 14th at 10:08 a.m. And here's what I said. And by the way, this is not a perfect email, but I can tell you it's a confident email. It's the way I communicate and we communicate with people. I said, Carla, thank you for reaching out regarding the sale of your home. We would be honored to represent you when the time is right. We can move as fast or as slow as you need. As I mentioned this morning in our text, we're in the midst of middle of a significant change in our industry. It is critical that you work with a broker who has the knowledge, skill, and talent to guide you through. We have a fabulous marketing plan for our clients, but I want you to know that your choice of broker should only be based on their negotiation and transaction management strategy, okay? And then I said, in the meantime, I have several documents for you to review. They are agency disclosure. And I said, this document outlines the possible relationships in a real estate transaction, the residential agreement. I sent them the red line version so they could see how much change is happening. And what prompted this email is because she actually sent me a text and said, "Helen, by the way, I heard that commissions are now negotiable." Okay. Subsequent to this email, by the way, we had a conversation. I sent her a copy of now one of my new favorite forms, the Broker's Compensation Advisory. explained to her what that is. And then I said, and the remaining 4 documents directly related to a seller's responsibility for disclosure in California. The attached advisories explain what is required and da 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 da. And then we actually talked after this, and then I walked her through even more. So I would get really good at how you're communicating, what you're doing, why you're doing it, and how they can help, how you can help, how it helps them. Okay. All right. What questions do you have?
Go ahead.
I do. I have, it's Louisa. So,
Hi, Louisa.
okay. Hi, how are you?
I'm great.
Okay. So from my understanding is we have the BRBC with the BCA, right? And then
Yep.
so once we make a call, so we're gonna see that MLS doesn't say anything about our commission. So then we call the agent, and then the agent confirms that yes, they're gonna be giving us some concession. Then we can fill out an SPBB stating that seller is agreeing to pay buyer's agent's commission, and then is that all together? Is that my understanding? Is that right?
It's a possibility. So let's do this right quick.
What's that called? SPPC?
Okay. So
Chris,
So
I just
the-
want to jump in here. I think Rich told us no on that. It has to
yeah,
go.
I don't like saying absolutely no, because on the town hall today, this got brought up. So what I'm going to say is this. So this form is designed to be used with, it can be other, but largely it's designed to be used with the RPA. Okay, so when you check that box at your buyer's request, there is, so you would then use this form to send over with your offer.
I mean,
He
that's what I meant.
also-
I mean, like, we're gonna
Chris-
add that our offer.
I'm sorry?
I mean, that's what I meant. Like, so when we write our offer,
Oh,
so
right,
we're
right,
gonna
right.
have
Yes, so when you
BRC,
send the offer, yes.
BCA, and then
Right.
the SPBB. Okay,
So
Right,
you're
so
going
you're
to
gonna
check
go-
the box.
So you're going to go here,
right.
okay? So you're going to go to 3G, right here,
Is G3.
3G3, you check that box, and then right here it says it's attached. Now understand,
Okay.
and again, this is a whole nother discussion. Now kind of sort of commission is in play, depending upon the mindset of the seller. Okay, so you're making a request, be no different than largely saying, hey, we want the seller to pay 3% of the purchase price toward the buyer's closing costs. Seller can say, I'll consider that, but we'll see. The question that's getting brought up, and this is where I think we're stuck a little bit in, is if a seller's willing to, in writing with their listing agent, have broker co-op, not through the MLS after D-Day, okay, how do we secure that commission before we get to this point? Okay, and there's not a, because they're going to eliminate the CBC. If we had the CBC, you could use that form, but that's going to be gone as of next week, according to CAR. Okay. So, but if that was your question, yes, you would use the SPBB, right? Seller payment to buyer's broker, with your RPA, check the box, and go from there.
Do we
Okay, and
have
that
to include our buyer broker agreement with that as well? No, just
in
that.
in theory, no. Again, this is being talked about quite a bit. Now, if the seller says so they're accepting it. If they accept it, they're accepting it on the terms that you've outlined here. Okay. And then it says buyer authorizes buyer's broker, and if applicable, here, actually, let me look at this right quick. Because what we'd have to look at here. So if they request it, yes. So if
But
it's
not the
me,
whole agreement, Chris.
no,
Just
well, that's yes. So that's a good question, and I think
it's
that's a
actually
legal
in the
question.
document if you go back.
In the
Yeah.
16.
It's under delivery of buyer's representation agreement. number
paragraph 1.
3.
There you go. Okay.
They were recommending we do the last page.
Yeah, I think it's page 16 of the
Yeah,
buyer
it says such as the last page, right? So Item 3, Chris.
Yeah, no, I'm here. Yeah, so that's a for example. Yeah, so so they're talking about 16, correct? Whoever piped that in there. Okay, what other question?
Hi, Christine. Thank you so
Hi,
much for
Christine.
a really good way of explaining things. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
My question is, using the RPA, checking the box, adding the SPBB,
Mhm.
spelling it out what you're asking for if you're asking, for the buyer's agent's fees. So having said that, it's almost redundant to even have a conversation with the listing agent. I'm trying to get mostly out of that part because I deal with so many listing agents that don't know anything. So this is
Yeah.
like area of gray area that I don't want to go by what somebody said. So I almost feel like that need to have the conversation. I'm filling it out. Here's the RPA.
Yeah. So no, I think that's a really great point. So here's unless it's illegal, immoral, unethical, something on one of those things, there's always a couple of ways something can be done, right? So I don't disagree. In fact, I was having an email exchange with a agent friend of mine at a relatively large brokerage up here, asking him about some of the practices they are not going to employ, and they said, "Oh, we're going to get confirming email," and I'm like, "Okay, well that's great, but I'm not sure exactly what that's going to do. That's not worth the the computer it's written on." So the way to think about it, I think, is it would be so if you make a decision to call an agent, it would be no different than if you were to call an agent and say, "Hey, I'm just curious how your home's been on the market for a little bit. How motivated is your seller? My seller needs, or my buyer needs some help with closing costs. Do you think your seller might entertain XYZ?" And they say, "Well, yeah, I think they will. Bring me an offer," right? So then what I'm going to do, then I'm just going to simply go back to my client if I choose to do it this way, and I'm going to say, "Hey, here's what I've been told. None of it matters till it's in writing, it's inked, it's signed by all parties, blah, 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 blah." Okay, we say that a lot to people, until the fat lady sings, it ain't over. Okay. But I could easily suggest that what you're saying is a good way to go too. And that is, you write it and say, "Buyer." So what we might consider, so Mrs. Voto says to our clients, "We're going to make recommendations. At the end of the day, Mr. Buyer or seller, you're the boss." So what we say to them is, we say, "Okay, there's really two ways we can approach this. One, we just write the offer up, ask them to pay it, see how they respond. Two, we call them ahead of time and say, 'Hey, what's your take?' Understanding that is not enforceable even if they say it. So how would you like us to handle this?" "Well, I don't know. What do you think, Chris?" "Well, I know this agent pretty well. And again, it doesn't matter unless it's in writing, but they might give us some information. So I think given that, I might give them a jingle if you're good with that." "Yeah, call them." But I think that's a really great point, Christine.
Yeah, same conversation. Like I call it when I'm writing and say, "Okay, here's who I have as the seller. I don't want seller's choice for your title or escrow." I always ask so that I can have the most filled out RPA that hopefully counter, and they just go, "Yeah."
Yep. Yeah. Right. If you write offers that are acceptable, makes it easy for the listing agent.
You may also, if you have a buyer that is not willing or able to pay the compensation, you may have that conversation as you're scheduling a showing, because your buyer may not want to see homes that there is no possibility of the seller paying that compensation. That's a possibility too. So there are lots of different scenarios.
Well, there are, and I think so, Linda. I appreciate you bringing that up, because there was a lot of discussion around that when we thought there was going to be language in the listing agreement that there would be offers of compensation still, just not through the MLS. And I'm hearing less of those conversations now because, and again, one of the things that we say to our clients all the time is, we say this, we say, negotiation is psychological. And because we're dealing with the human mind, we don't know specifically. Somebody can say, no, 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 no. And then they get an offer before them and they just found out their, mother got sick yesterday. Now their motivation changed, so on and so forth.
Absolutely. Totally get
Right.
that.
So
Absolutely.
right. But no, I think having that conversation with a buyer to say, hey, look, here's the real world challenge we're in. We don't know. We're not going to know 9.9 times out of 10, 9.99999 times out of 10, whether or not that seller has even had a thought about and put anything in writing that they're willing to pay a specific number.
Right.
Right. Because again, unless brokerage create addendums or do something that's attached to that listing agreement that says, yes, we are going to pay this to a cooperating broker, we just don't know. And yes, that's a heck of a thing, right?
So going with what you both are saying, Linda and Chris, is that to me, I still don't feel that way about asking, in my opinion, because you're right. The numbers are going to speak, whatever it is, the numbers,
yep.
Terms, whatever it is. And the seller may say no, their agent may not have explained it to them. Who knows what the scenario is?
Right. Right.
I think what we're trying to do, Christine, and I think that's great, and I might do it the same way myself. I just want to make sure that everybody understands that, there are many ways in which to accomplish that and not just one right or wrong answer. Because some of us have more confidence and are comfortable and will just write the offer, and some other people want at least some conversation. And again, nothing is real until it's in a signed agreement, period.
Right. So what I'm going to here's the other thing I'm going to say, because there's a lot more discussion now around paragraph 3G 3G1 and 3G3. Okay, so it's very clear that 3G3 is specific to the commission, the compensation to the buyer's broker, and G1 is an umbrella, okay, that we've typically used for seller concessions for closing costs and blah 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 blah. Okay, so here's the thing, because again, negotiation psychological. So let's just say hypothetically, the seller has the property is listed, their agent's trying to explain to them kind of how the real estate agent mind works, and they're going, I don't care, I read the article and da 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 da, and I am not paying a blah 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 compensation because this and that. And so they have a made up mind. Now here's the funny thing, that same seller might be willing to pay 3% to our buyer's closing costs, but they might be like almost like morally opposed. I am not paying a blah 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 because it's called a commission, right? So there's a nuance within the nuance on these things because of the fact that the concession, the payment of the buyer side's compensation is a concession. It's just a different concession. So there's a whole bunch of layers on the psychology in this, because if you have a seller who's like, hey, I'm open to any payment, I don't care what you call it, all I want to know is what's my bottom line, that's different than somebody says, nope, I'm just not going to pay a commission because I don't want to. Versus like, oh no, I'd pay for points. So there's a psychology there. So when you say how would I fill the form out? Well, if I knew somebody was opposed to commission, I would just have my buyer recommend to my buyer, ask for a concession.
Yeah, so it's basically just psychological how you read it.
It is.
Yeah.
We tell our clients all the time, it's human psychology. I know how I might react. We can predict a little bit based on our experience and things that we've seen and patterns of behavior and da 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 da. But we cannot guarantee Mr. and Mrs. Buyer that they're going to do. They might get. It's like when you do a counter offer and you're like countering like, two little tiny things, and the buyer gets so personally offended because you made that counter, and they leave, and you're like, what?
So almost like if you reached out to the listing agent, if I'm representing the buyer and I ask her verbally, I know nothing is until it's in writing, but I ask her verbally and she's not real receptive, basically says, we'll put your offer on paper or whatever, like,
yeah,
be some listing agents that are just going to be yeah, we definitely are. And so then you would just put it there, but if they seem resistant or we're not sure, let's see the offer, then maybe the
Yeah.
concession is the better way to go.
Yeah, I look, so I'm just gonna, I'm very redundant. So I'm gonna continually tell our client kind of the same thing. We're just not, so unless it's in writing, doesn't count. I can, there's two ways to look at this. One way is this way, one way is this way. Here's the up and here's the down of this way or this way. What do you want to do? We make them part of the process. And then they go, well, what do you think? Well, okay, I can give you, again, I don't know 100% because I don't have a perfect crystal ball. Here's the thing, da 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 da. Well, I know that, so again, I mean, right. So at least, so if Joe Smith in your market is a really good guy and largely, um, he does business a way you can share that and say, based on my experience with this person, you're not going to defame another agent, but if you have somebody that, has a track record for being a little more challenging, you may or may not make a call based on that. So those are just things you're going to have that discussion. At the end of the day, it is ultimately the client's decision how they want you to proceed. Okay. So you give them the information, like a good doctor, you give them the information and you tell them what you believe to be the potential risks and rewards of either, and then they'll ultimately make the decision with you. So I'm going to call Stuart right quick.
Hey,
He has his hand raised.
Real quickly, as you said about being redundant, I did hear you say earlier, and just scroll back to G, please. To
G, sorry.
No problem. You sort of said real quickly in passing that lenders are not going to have a problem with G1 there, having say 2.5%. They're not going to count it again, because I know there's limits as to how much.
Yeah. So what? Yeah.
Well,
thank you. Thank you for that. So let me clarify. What CAR is indicating, that lenders are indicating, is if you put, so let's say you don't use 3G3 for commission, okay, and you use instead the amount. You include all the numbers in the top portion, okay? Those numbers will be counted against whatever the max credit is. This is what, again, I don't know this for a fact, by the way. This is what CAR is contending that the lending powers are telling them. So if it's separated out on 3G3, what they're saying is, let's just say hypothetically the seller agrees to pay that which the buyer is responsible for, the buyer agreement. Let's just say, I like round numbers, it's 3% of 515K. That does not go against the max amount of credits allowed by the lender. Okay, so CAR is encouraging to use 3G3 so that it doesn't inadvertently. So let's say, for example, you wrote an offer asking for a seller credit, and you're approaching the max on credits, and then you do, your buyer does their investigations and and it gets renegotiated. And they're like, hey, we don't want them to fix that. We just want more money. Well, that won't work because you're above your cap. So if that commission concession ends up in G1, it could affect the amount ultimately of a credit. If it goes in 3G, what I've been hearing and told on every town hall is it won't go against that lender credit amount.
thank you.
Hope that makes sense.
So
So
it
when
sounds like,
yeah,
in,
use 3G3 for the compensation.
if
There
I
may be
understand
some
that
exception
correctly-
to that.
Oh, sorry about that. If I understand that correctly,
you're
it
good.
also means in 3G1, under additional terms, you can't click other and put compensation. Is that correct? 3G1, 3G1, additional terms, 3G1?
Yeah, right there. Well, no,
3G1. 3G1.
You could.
Okay, so you can use the word compensation. So you could check.
Well, I'm
Rich,
not sure.
I was going to say, Chris, Rich, I believe, was cautioning us not to. So I think
Well,
that's a check with our broker.
Okay, I am too. And what I'm saying is 3G3 is most likely the best. The question was, can one? The simple answer is, based on everything that CAR has indicated, 3G1 can be used for concessions, including but not limited to the compensation.
So maybe
So they're
the-
they're not recommending against doing that. They're just cautioning for the credit on the cap. And I don't recall them specifically talking about that there's any legal reason why you can't check and put there. But the best practice, it certainly appears at this point, is that G3 for the compensation is the way to go. Again, in my brain, the only exception to that would be, and again, you're not going to know this, and this is a challenge, is if you had a seller again that is just adamant, I will not pay a commission.
So maybe
I
it's
won't.
a check the other box, and the language under there in other terms is, you know, to be used against buyers choosing, you know, of whatever the costs are, the buyer
Yeah.
chooses to use it
Yeah.
against.
Yeah,
Something
because
like
I
that.
asked exactly. I was asking mostly concerning the nomenclature because words matter. So is compensation
do.
allowed, but commission isn't allowed? Is fee allowed? Or, you know, certain words seem to not be allowed,
Well,
but others are.
so
I mean, maybe it's just
here-
closing costs of buyers
Okay.
choosing.
So here's what I'm going to say. Okay, so there's a difference between what's the law, and then what's allowed under a rule. So, for example, an MLS rule is not a law; it's a rule under the membership. You know, all these changes aren't laws; they're rules under our associations with the with our memberships of the association as part of the settlement. Okay, so I'm going to say this: if the question is, can somebody put the word compensation there? I'm not aware of any legal reason. I don't believe it's a violation of law to put that there. Okay, I'm not an attorney, so I could be wrong, but I don't think I am. Okay, now if there's a compelling reason, I've not heard it yet from CAR, and maybe there is, but if there's a compelling reason why it increases the risk to the broker or potentially risking the settlement, then you wouldn't want to put it there. But I've not heard the rationale yet behind why that would trigger some big thingy, because compensation's all over this thing. And in fact, the disclosures talk about concessions, and they talk about, well, here, let's look at this. This is the MLSA. Concessions are monetary, and this is what CR is going by. So again, I'm not saying to put compensation in there. I can tell you what our practice is going to be, with very rare exception, and they may not even be a exception. We're using 3G3. Okay. Concessions are monetary payments that a seller agrees to contribute toward a buyer's expenses and other costs a buyer is responsible for in a transaction. And then it says, concessions may include, and then it says buyer broker compensation.
Yeah.
So I know based on this, it's not a violation of the law. There may be some legal risk that one is taking. I can't, in my experience, I can't see what that risk would be. But again, I as I say all the time, I know a lot and I've learned a lot, but I certainly don't know everything. And I don't think CAR or anybody else knows, because again, one of the things that I shared early on in the presentation is they're still fine tuning.
It's only going to be a problem when it's a problem.
Yes. Yeah.
I think it's
So
worth
we're
stating that when you're preparing an offer, speaking to the lender and finding out how the lender is structuring that loan and the product is going to be key to how you're going to fill it out.
Yes. No, that is it right there. So great communication anyhow, because I mean, look, here, I'm going to give you one. Let's say there's a loan product out right now that none of us are aware of. Okay. Because it's a non-conforming loan, and they're like, hey, and some of you may be aware of one. I'm not, but there may be one. And they say, hey, we're happy to allow the buyer to finance their compensation they have to pay. So yes, it is absolutely important on several levels to strategize with the lender to say, okay, how can we structure this best? And that's part of what your value, when we talk about the value proposition, part of your value proposition that you're going to articulate to buyers is how you interact with other industry experts. So Jasmine, that's a great point. Yes, ma'am.
So I have a question if we change gears just a little bit to get a little further clarification on your broker calls. Say I'm the listing agent and I'm hosting my own open house. And I tend to put together offer guideline sheet that I have pre-printed out that states stuff that's important to my seller that we've agreed upon. Is there any, are we prohibited to write on the offer guideline sheet that seller is open to concessions or entertaining offers of compensation? Yes.
Okay. Yes. So that is a great question, and I'm Scandinavian, little German, and there's some Irish in me. If you ever see me at the beach, you'll go, "Oh, I see the Irish." Not much.
I'm
tan.
Armenian, so put me in the mix.
Okay. So if my Irish gets going here a little bit, here's why. So when I watched this thing unfold, I heard people, and I even said this, I think, Jasmine, when I was down in your market center last, when I heard, and I won't say his name because it's being recorded, a very prominent person at CAR running around telling everybody, oh, offers of compensation are going to be no problem. You're just going to be able to do them through MLS. You're going to be able to put them on your agent website, your flyers, no problem, no problem, no problem, no problem. That's all we heard. Okay. We heard that all the way until the end of last month when the forms were going to get released. Then what I heard, once these were released, oh, we can't weigh in on that. You got to talk to your own legal counsel. You got to talk to your own legal counsel. So what they're saying now, so no one is saying offers of compensation can't be advertised. We're clear they cannot be advertised through the multiple listing service. But I can tell you the answer to your question is fuzzy as heck right now. So they're still saying offers of compensation are still allowable. No problem, no problem. We're not going to give you any of the forms to deal with any of them or to create the language, but they're no problem. So per some of the people, and I don't, I could say initials, but I'm not going to say that either, right? If you can put them on flyers, you can put them on blah, 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 blah. Okay. But my sense is, and I said this when I was down there, my sense is that the Department of Justice is not done with us yet. That's been my sense for a long time. I believe they do not want offers of compensation. And I think instead of us just being told that as an industry, because they thought it might freak people out too quick, they've eased us into the fact that there's not going to be offers of compensation at any point, any time in the future. I could be wrong on that, but it seems that's the path we're marching down. So
may I ask a few quick questions?
Yes.
Great. Just some bottom line, because there's so much information coming, and it's my business after 22 years, kind of on a different side of it. I do piles of lease listings and transactions. It's like a big part of my bread butter. I'm trying to find on CAR the link with the forms in red. I want to just be very succinct and simply provide my listing clients preset what we should expect, and then have a clear idea of when those forms are going to be available really, and when when it's dropping. You keep saying dropping, and I don't quite follow just the basic, like bottom line.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, so what you're going to look at right here. So when I say dropping, that's not a technical term, so I apologize.
That's okay. I'm just trying to really dig in.
No, you're fine.
Trying to look for bottom lines, and it's
you can see my screen right now.
Yes.
Okay, so in theory, the drop date or the D date or D-Day date, whatever you want to call it, right here, July 24th, 2024, which is fast upon us.
It's Wednesday. Okay.
Okay. All
and
right.
That date means that they're going to remove all the car information?
No, that's the date in the forms library. Now, again, there might be a little bit of a lag depending upon what you use for your form sources. But in zip forms, I'm guessing they're going to be populated probably in the middle of the night. So when you wake up on July 24th, those forms will all be released.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay. Now, by the way, since you asked a question, I'm going to clarify one other quick thing. So the gap that I keep referring to is the time between July 24th, the new forms get released, no later than August 17th when the MLS changes occur. Now, I believe yours is, I can't remember. It's ours is
13th.
13. Thank you. Right. So you've got a gap of 7 plus 13 days. Right. So that's when I refer to the gap. So right quick, all you're going to do is this. You're going to go
That's when
to
the new forms have to be signed and
That-
sealed to be effective.
that's when the offer of compensation, the mechanism through the multiple listing service is kaput. It's broken.
Right.
So when
Okay.
you log in and you go look for, hey, how much am I getting paid on this? It'll not be there. Okay. There'll be a concession field in most MLSs, but that won't achieve the same thing. So right quick, all you're going to do is you're going to go to car.org. You're going to click sign in. So if you don't know your username and password, reset it. Okay.
Yes.
You're going to sign in here. And they don't want you to miss it. So right here, new forms and business practices, everything here, clicky right there. Broker compensation compliance. So you can either do one of two things. You can either drink a
Where's
bunch
the
of
broker?
coffee.
I'm sorry. Where's the broker compensation that you just mentioned? On
It's all it is.
Oh,
It's right here.
okay. All those forms have the red version.
Town hall. Yeah. So if you go here now, the forms are right here under forms.
Okay.
There's an FAQ. All sorts of fun things. So you either drink lots of coffee or lots of Chardonnay and go through all these.
Okay. So to present to my client, I wait until I look for these forms and then just to give her a clue what she
So
needs.
here's what I would do.
When is the deadline for those to be effective?
Well, so the practice changes let me say it this way. You're gonna feel it and our clients are gonna feel it once the MLSs change. Okay. So if that's the 13th, that's when they're gonna feel it. So the question is, when are you gonna start talking to them about it? My suggestion, as I said earlier, is yesterday.
Yes, exactly. I'm trying to get real clear on when does that form implement, what date, if we know.
So
Like,
the forms are going to be, so the forms are being released the 24th right here.
The signature, when is a wet signature real?
Well, good question. So
when
here's
does
what I'm
my
gonna say.
listing expire suddenly? I'm just trying to understand. Okay.
Okay. All right. So what I would do is I would, knowing that it's coming, because we're talking about a couple of things here. Some things are contractual and some things are disclosure and advisory. Okay. So for example, the BCA, okay, that's an advisory. Okay. So in theory, if you've never got this document signed or acknowledged, but you showed that you've sent it to them and communicated it to them, which is what I do, right? It's as good as having them sign or initial. Okay. Now that doesn't work for a contract. So what you need to do, what I would be doing is I would be looking at this form right here. So if I have an active listing agreement, okay. So what this is, and I'm not being a smart aleck when I say this. When I teach classes live, I always say, okay, how do you know what this form is? Is it a disclosure? Is it an addendum? Is it an advisory? What is it? And inevitably, the class will often sit there and go, "Oh, how do you know?" Well, read it. It's a disclosure. So, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, what I'm going to send to you is a disclosure and a modification to our buyer representation. If it's the listing side, so this form only becomes effective once it's signed by, in this case, this is for a buyer, or for this form here, the sister form or brother form, or a seller. So if you're modifying your listing agreement and disclosing to your seller or your client the changes, then you would use this form. So what I would do, I'm sorry, tell me your first name.
Carrie.
Carrie. So what I would do, Carrie, is I would call, so let's pretend you're my client. I'm gonna call you and say, hello, Carrie. Hey, Carrie, it's Chris. How you doing? Hey, did I catch you at a good time? Great. Hey, the reason I'm calling is I wanna share some information with you that's really, really, really important. Okay. So what I'm gonna be doing is I'm gonna send
She
you
does
a
everything
draft.
on writing. It's just
No,
bottom line
no, just
writing.
hold.
Okay.
Okay, hold on. Just listen.
Sure.
Okay, so you don't have to do it this way, but this is what I do. No, you do want to get everything in writing. But what we're leading to that. Oh, so you can just send it to them, DocuSign right now, and say sign it. But I don't think that's a good bedside manner. So I would call and say, hey, just want to let you know, here's what I'm going to be sending it to you, and here's why I'm going to be sending it.
Thank you so much.
Press
I have
hard
a
for press.
I have a
Press
question.
hard for copies. Yeah.
Okay, so I sent 2 of these out this week, working with 2 sets of buyers. One set I've never worked with. They signed it right away. We opened escrow last night. That was great.
Yeah.
I have
Yep.
another client that I've been working with for over 20 years. I've sold him a few homes, and he just said to me, I knew he would be difficult to sign it because he said, you did contracts for living, this, that, and the other. And I'm not going to sign this because I read the whole class action lawsuit. And until August 17th, I don't need to sign anything like this. And I said, well, my company wants us all to work with buyers that have signed this documentation, and he will not sign it until August 17th.
So
Okay,
that's
so you're
the
talking
date
about
that it's required to have a signature? Is that's what I'm trying to understand. When is it
Okay,
required?
great. Okay, so what you need first to know, or what MLS are you in?
Southland Regional.
Okay, so Southland Regional has a drop dead date for offers of compensation through the multiple listing service. We're talking about a buyer here, correct? Is that I hear you correctly?
Yes.
Okay, so there's a drop dead date on that from that MLS. Okay, so if it were me, so there's what they've heard and then there's what is. Okay, so and by the way, on the buyer side, it affects you more than it does them, unfortunately, because on that date, because there's no offer of compensation any longer, and I don't have your agreement in front of me. The question is, under the current agreement, is the buyer obligated to pay you, or is the buyer? So part of it depends on what the existing agreement says. But the August 17th date is the date in which the changes must occur. Shasta County or Shasta MLS, which you probably won't get up there anytime soon. Redding, California, theirs is happening August 1st. Metrolist in Sacramento area and a lot of Northern California is happening August 12th. CRMLS is happening August 13th. Okay, so the mechanism in those MLSs for offers of compensation are breaking on those dates. Okay, so the only thing I could suggest you might do is give him evidence of what you're saying is truthful. So you might go to your MLS website because they're chock full of information and videos and all sorts of things, Q&As, and you give them a copy of the Q&A if need be to show them that literally this is changing on this date, not the date that you've heard.
Got it. No, yes, but I guess our broker, Rich Pisani, has wanted us to have these signed for a while now. So I've been trying to get buyers to sign it, and he's just been really difficult, and he made me sound like a liar. He's like, that's not true. Your company cannot make your clients do that until August.
Well, so here's what I will say. So if somebody were to ask me, can we make our client do anything? My answer is no, we can't make them.
Right.
Now, there's another question that comes into play here, and that is whether or not there's a material change in the agreements that we have signed, and is the customer compelled to sign and line up with these changes? That's a really good question, because they may have a cancellation right if we can't perform under the terms in which we signed them up in the first place, buyer or seller.
Got it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's look, this is a not a technical term. It's a little sucky. So it's going to take a while for us to assimilate and absorb, and it's certainly going to take the customer a while too, and particularly when they've been barraged with really bad information from the media when this thing began to break. Okay, what else?
Chris, is the SPBB seller payment to buyer's broker available now, or will that be released? Because I'm in a situation right now where I'm writing an offer and the seller has offered, it is? No.
Well, okay, so you're writing an offer now?
So yes, I'm writing an offer
Okay.
today, it's where they're only offering 1%, but I spoke with the listing agent and he said, we'll pay 2%, but you gotta add it in the offer. So
Okay.
I'm gonna check
Okay.
the box, but I'm wondering, do I send that, is that form available yet, or?
Okay, well, let me ask you something, as we're looking at a couple things, so hang on here. Is the listing in the multiple listing service currently?
Yes.
Okay. All right. And the offer of compensation through the MLS currently is what?
1%.
Okay. All right. So let's pretend for a moment that none of this lawsuit stuff had ever happened. Okay. So what you would do is you would get Form CBC, which is going away on the 24th.
Okay.
But it's here now. And you would simply have them sign Form CBC for the higher commission rate. That's allowable. It's been allowable. We don't use it very much for that, but that's been allowable for some time. So that is one option that's currently available. Now that option will go away. This form is, so if I go back into, I'm going to do this. Hang on here 1 second.
I have my computer, I'm pulling it up as you're just talking.
Yeah, I believe the form was released in June, and this is a modification, but I don't want to say that and then. Did y'all hear there was a big technology glitch today?
Cooperating broker, yeah, I found it.
You found it? Yeah. So my recollection was it was
It's
part
still
of the. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So this. So here's what I would do. Let's see. No, you're fine there because you'll be in contract. Now this is where it gets a little bit funky. Okay, so we're gonna hit it. So today's Friday. What's today? Today's the 19th. 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. Okay. So we have a few. So as you approach some of these dates, this is where it's going to get a little bit funny because you're going to want to try to use the revised form as you're approaching, but you should be fine. Just get it accepted over the weekend, then you don't have to worry about revisions.
Yeah.
So that's why I want you to keep the red copies, because you'll see the red copies versus what you just had somebody sign. And that will then edify you as to, okay, I understand that document. Okay, what did they change now in the new world?
You can only use the current SPVB form if you have a signed BRBC, buyer broker agreement, with your client currently. It's one of the requirements.
I apologize. I assumed that was the case. So if that's not the case, then use the aforementioned CBC until it goes extinct.
Thank you.
Yeah, I apologize. I did not clarify. I assumed there was an existing buyer broker agreement. Okay, what else?
But I don't need to include the buyer broker agreement that I have in place when I submit the offer. I can just send this CBC with that, correct?
So while the offers of compensation, well, in theory, you could you can use that form because even if there's not a property in the MLS, you could use that form to secure an offer of compensation outside of the MLS. The unfortunate part, I think, is that you are only going to be able to do that between now and next Tuesday.
Okay.
But yes, you can use that form to secure the offer of compensation, the higher offer of compensation.
Okay.
Okay, what else?
I think we schedule another time next week.
Yeah, there's a lot coming. So stay tuned. I think there's some really good look. This is challenging for sure. At the same time, while it's not a lot of fun, there's always opportunity in it for professionals who are really good at communicating. Not everyone's going to love this from the consumer, but if we can continue to pour into our databases, pour into our people, keep reading the documents, and just know that there's going to be most likely numerous releases upcoming as things are fine-tuned and as things break with goodness knows what on the litigation front.
Yeah.
Christine,
go ahead.
Yeah, Christine, were you here at the beginning today?
Oh, yes. Yep.
Did you saw my typos?
And I didn't see any, but I know you're like, oh, I don't know if Christine was
Oh, you didn't. You missed that slide. Okay. When you see it, I put a sentence in just for you.
Private joke, everyone. Private joke.
Okay. Who was going to ask me something? Was that you?
No, I was just telling you, thank you so much for all your time, your knowledge, and all of the crazy agents. We're trying to figure it out. But the cool thing is that we have, between you and Rich and everybody, we get to lock arms and just we're tackling this together. But like you and Rich are doing the heavy lifting, and then of course we have like Christine and Jasmine who are on as many town halls as they can be as well. But really just appreciate your contribution and your time as we go through this.
Yeah, thank you for that, Steph.
Thanks, Steph, for making this possible for everybody. I really super appreciate it. It's awesome. Thank you.
Hey, the other thing I want to leave you with this. Okay, I want to leave you with this. Okay. We have fabulous marketing plan, but I want you to know that your choice of broker should ultimately be based on, excuse me, here's the sentence. It's my own writing, and I couldn't remember where I put it. It is critical. This is the message of the day right now. Okay. And I want you to emblaze this on your heart and on your mind and in your soul. And then I want you to rebroadcast this when you talk to people, when you send emails, when you're at open houses. It is critical that you work with a broker who has the knowledge, skill, and talent to guide you through, in this case, the selling process. I want you to use a sentence like that over and over. I want you to say it out loud. I want you, buyers, sellers, whatever. The real estate transaction has always been a big deal, and it's even more important. So it's always been critical to find a highly qualified real estate professional. I believe that it's more critical than ever that the consumer work with a broker who has the skill, knowledge, and talent to help them guide them through the days ahead. Would you agree with that?